Pam Bondi's voice cracked like thunder across the committee room. "Stop talking!" The words didn't just interrupt, they detonated. Every eye snapped toward her. The room, moments ago filled with political pageantry, froze in stunned silence. Phones trembled in hands. Pens paused mid-sentence. A low ripple of shock swept through the crowd like a silent gasp shared by hundreds. And yet Jasmine Crockett didn't move. She didn't blink. She didn't flinch. She didn't even turn her head. She stared ahead with the kind of stillness that says, "I've been here before." The air grew thick. Not with heat, but history. The kind of moment you don't just watch, you feel in your gut. The kind that unspools decades of silencing and rewinds every moment someone like Crockett was told to sit down, be quiet, wait their turn. Bondi's face was flushed, jaw locked, eyes wide. A woman used to control suddenly panicked by its absence. Across the room murmurs began. A reporter's pen dropped. A senator leaned forward. Somewhere a camera lens zoomed in. Crockett turned, just slightly. Her voice didn't rise, her tone didn't shift, but her words, they landed like a gavel. And in that instant, the balance changed. No one knew it yet, but a meme was being born. A soundbite that would loop 1,000,000 times before morning. An image of a black woman in poise, power, and perfect control that would fill feeds, stories, and hearts. What had begun as another chaotic hearing had become something else entirely. Something unforgettable. Because Jasmine Crockett didn't just respond. She reclaimed, and in that calm, devastating reply, she didn't just defend herself. She spoke for everyone who's ever been shouted down and chose dignity instead of volume. But how did it come to this? What pushed a national figure to scream in desperation, and why did one calm reply leave her speechless? The hearing wasn't supposed to go viral. It was another day in Washington, another stacked panel, another televised showdown cloaked in procedure. But beneath the surface, a storm had been building. This wasn't just about policy or protocol. It was about power, and who gets to wield it. On paper, the hearing was centered around alleged misconduct, subpoenas, ethics, oversight. But anyone paying attention knew the real tension ran deeper. This was a stage for something older and uglier. From the moment the session began, the energy was off. Interruptions flew faster than opening statements. Snide remarks bled through supposed neutrality, and beneath every exchange was an unspoken question. Whose voice really matters here? Pam Bondi, seated confidently at the table, wasn't just representing one side of an argument, she was representing a legacy, the kind that interrupts before listening, the kind that wields privilege like a shield and a sword. With her signature smirk and sharp tongue, she had come not to discuss but to dominate. Across from her, the Democratic bench held its own. But one figure stood out: Jasmine Crockett. Sharp, composed, dressed not just with intent, but with presence. She didn't need to shout. She didn't need to grandstand. She knew her power. Still, the room buzzed with a silent tension, the kind that builds when representation walks into spaces not built for it and refuses to shrink. To the watching public, it was just another broadcast, another partisan skirmish. But for those who felt the undertones, who understood the coded language and the sharp edges dressed in civility, this was something else. This was the latest battle in a long war. Who gets to speak? Who gets to be heard? And what happens when the rules of decorum are weaponized against the very people they were supposed to protect? Pam Bondi spoke with the ease of someone used to the floor. Interruptions weren't accidents, they were tactics. Raised eyebrows weren't curiosity, they were dismissal. The room echoed with old power, cloaked in modern rhetoric. And then, Jasmine Crockett's name was called, her mic turned on. The chair nodded, and Washington braced for another routine statement. But what came next wasn't routine. It was a recalibration, shift in energy, a moment that would fracture the day and rewrite the headlines, because Jasmine Crockett didn't just take the floor, she took back the narrative. You'll want to see what happened next, because it wasn't just political, it was personal. And when Jasmine Crockett began to speak, everything changed. Pam Bondi didn't arrive in American politics quietly. She arrived with teeth. From the early days of her tenure as Florida's Attorney General, Bondi made her brand unmistakable. Confrontation over compromise, soundbite over substance, dominance over dialogue. Her rise wasn't about building bridges. It was about bulldozing opposition. And for years, it worked. Cable networks adored her. She played the game with a prosecutorial grin, sliding seamlessly from courtroom to camera. With platinum polish and a poised demeanor, she delivered conservative talking points like closing arguments, each syllable sharpened for impact. But it was during the Trump years that Pam Bondi became something more than a political personality. She became an enforcer. When the Mueller report threatened to shake the foundation of the administration, it was Bondi who stepped onto the stage with icy certainty, swatting away nuance with defiant conviction. When impeachment hearings roiled the Capitol, there she was again, not just defending the president, but dismantling his critics in full view of the cameras. Her style was unmistakable. Cut them off. Talk over, keep talking, win the moment, and for a long time, she did. Pam Bondi didn't debate, she devoured. She didn't listen, she lunged. In clip after clip, you see it. Journalists trying to get a word in, panelists sighing mid-interruption, even anchors struggling to keep her on topic. She didn't just talk louder, she talked longer, with the swagger of someone who knew the platform would always come back to her. It was about control. Control of narrative, control of the room, control of who gets heard. And underneath it all, there was something more pointed, more practiced. She didn't just interrupt, she silenced. She interrupted women more. She interrupted women of color. Most, and the world noticed. But Bondi didn't flinch. She called it passion. Brushed off criticism as media spin. To her supporters, she was fearless. To others, she was calculated, a master of rhetorical violence hidden beneath polite smiles. So when she stepped into this hearing, it wasn't her first rodeo. She brought her usual playbook: drown them out, cut them off, win the clip. She sized up the room. She saw familiar faces. And then she saw Jasmine Crockett. Maybe she thought Crockett would fold, that a rising Democrat, a freshman from Texas, wouldn't dare push back. Maybe she assumed that volume would equal victory, like it had so many times before. And when the hearing got heated, Bondi did what Bondi always did. She jumped in. She cut off. She talked over. And then, as Crockett attempted to speak, she said it. Not whispered, not implied. Yelled, "Stop talking." A command, a warning, an assertion of power. And yet, something was different. There was no submission. No apology. No sudden silence. Jasmine Crockett didn't flinch, didn't shout back, didn't yield. She waited. She held, and then she answered. But this time the room wouldn't yield. Before Jasmine Crockett ever held a mic in Congress, she held something far heavier: the hands of grieving families. She walked courtroom halls in Texas, not for fame or favor, but for justice. Civil rights cases, housing discrimination, wrongful arrests, cases that didn't make headlines but made lives. She wasn't born into politics. She was pulled into it by necessity. Born and raised in St. Louis, Missouri, Crockett grew up surrounded by the realities of being black in America. She saw early how systems could fail, how names could be mispronounced not by accident, but by dismissal, how tone could matter more than truth, how young black women were expected to prove, and then prove again, and then smile while proving one more time. She chose law not just as a career, but as armor. If they weren't going to listen to her story, they'd listen to the facts she brought with it. And so she fought for people who couldn't afford attorneys, for those who had been wrongfully accused, for those who needed someone not just to speak for them, but with them. Then came the politics. Not polished, not packaged, just real. She didn't come from dynasties, didn't have million-dollar donors writing her scripts. She came from grassroots town halls and Twitter threads, from community forums and door-to-door conversations. She ran for the Texas House and won, and when she spoke, People listened, not because she was the loudest in the room, but because she sounded like them. Unapologetically young. Unapologetically black, unapologetically here. And that presence rattled people. The coded questions came quickly. Do you feel you're being emotional? Why so aggressive? Maybe tone it down a bit. The kind of language that sounds like advice but feels like erasure. She answered with poise. And receipts. Always receipts. Every time someone tried to make her small, she made the facts louder. Every time someone talked over her, she timed her rebuttal perfectly. Every time someone underestimated her, she let them. Because Crockett didn't need theatrics. She had timing. She didn't need to yell. She had precision. She didn't need to match their volume because she owned her voice. Her calm wasn't passive. It was tactical, a shield forged from every courtroom interruption, every media side-eye, every hearing where she was expected to sit still while the floor was handed to someone with less truth and more privilege. And that calm, that sharp, surgical calm, became her weapon. People online began to notice. Clips of her speaking cool, composed, commanding went viral. Commenters called her a rising star, a necessary voice, the kind of leader they'd been waiting for. Not because she barked, but because she built, not because she clapped back, but because she dismantled word by word, calmly, thoroughly, brilliantly. So when the committee hearing began that day, she didn't show up rattled. She showed up ready. Ready for the interruptions. Ready for the dismissals. Ready for the way the room would twist every sentence she spoke into something else, and still, she came with truth in her back pocket. She was prepared for bad faith arguments, for the media to clip her mid-sentence, for someone to try and make a moment out of her existence. What no one expected, especially not Pam Bondi, was that she would do it all without ever raising her voice, because Crockett's power wasn't in her volume, it was in her stillness, was in the way she could cut through a circus with a single sentence, and the more they tried to rattle her, the more composed she became. So when Bondi turned up the volume, Crockett sharpened her silence. The tension didn't snap all at once. It coiled. Jasmine Crockett had just begun her statement, her voice steady, her facts airtight. Her words cut through the political noise with the crisp cadence of someone who came prepared. She wasn't playing to the cameras. She was speaking to the record. And if we are to consider the intent behind these communications, she said, her finger gliding down a document, then the timeline becomes not just relevant, but critical. Bondi shifted in her seat. It's clear that the selective framing of these messages— I'm sorry. That's not accurate, Bondi interjected sharply, leaning forward. The interruption hung in the air like a slap. Crockett didn't stop. She didn't even look up. Was designed to evoke a reaction, not to inform, she continued. Another interruption. I have to respond to that, Bondi barked. The chair lifted a hand trying to intervene. Ms. Bondi, you'll have your turn. But Bondi wasn't listening. She leaned in harder, her voice rising. That is misleading. And frankly irresponsible, the gallery murmured. Pens scratched faster. Aide whispers turned into audible concern. Still, Crockett remained centered. Her eyes scanned the page. Her voice unshaken. No, ma'am. What's irresponsible is fabricating— Stop talking! It wasn't said. It was screamed. The room recoiled. Gasps, chairs creaked. The gavel slammed. The committee chair shouted over the chaos. Order! Order! Bondi's face was flush. Her hands trembled slightly, still resting on the table, her voice echoing off the wood-paneled walls. The same voice that had shut down newscasters, swatted away senators, and bulldozed past moderators now trembling with urgency and panic. The silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It was electric. All eyes turned to Crockett. She hadn't moved. No hand gestures. No sharp inhale, just stillness. The kind of stillness that spoke louder than any mic. The kind of stillness that said, You lost this the second you raised your voice. Because yelling doesn't erase truth. Volume doesn't rewrite facts, and rage doesn't Scare someone who's been through storms 10 times. Louder, Pam Bondi had thrown down the gauntlet. But what she didn't expect was what came next, because Crockett didn't flinch. Instead, she said something that detonated across America. "Ma'am," Jasmine Crockett said, her voice like glass slicing through smoke, "I wasn't finished." No escalation, no tremor, no hint of the chaos that had just exploded moments before. Just calm, controlled, final. The kind of calm that doesn't ask for silence, it commands it. Pam Bondi blinked, lips parted, as if the echo of her own outburst was still ricocheting in her ears. Across the room the silence tightened. The crowd leaned in, collectively realizing something rare was happening, a public reckoning. Delivered not with fire, but with ice. Crockett adjusted her papers not nervously, but precisely, deliberately, and looked forward, as if Bondi's tantrum hadn't even grazed her. "I've listened," she continued, eyes locked on the text in front of her, "to multiple witnesses spin their narratives unchecked, and I will continue my questioning uninterrupted, just as they did. No rage, no snark, just logic undeniable, surgical, a low involuntary bubbled up from one corner of the gallery. Someone else scribbled furiously on a notepad. One aide's jaw actually dropped. Bondi shifted again, suddenly unsure of where to rest her hands, her confidence cracking beneath the weight of what she couldn't control. A woman who refused to bend. Crockett pressed forward. She didn't return fire, she dismantled. She recited the timeline. The contradiction in Bondi's previous statement. The omitted detail that undercut her entire argument. Each word, a pin in the balloon of arrogance across the table. "Let the record reflect," she said, "that being loud doesn't make you right. It just makes you loud." There it was. Gasps, smirks. One member of the committee coughed to hide a grin. And on the internet, though the live stream lagged by only seconds, the moment had already begun its ascent. Clips were being clipped, captions typed, tweets drafted. Viewers at home grabbed their phones, still stunned. Did she just... She said it without even blinking. Queen energy. Absolute queen. This is how you win an argument without raising your voice. Bondi's shoulders slumped, not dramatically, but just enough for the cameras to catch. She tried to speak again, but this time, no one gave her space, not the chair, not the moment, and certainly not Jasmine Crockett. Crockett resumed her questions. She never returned to the outburst. She didn't need to. The crowd had already chosen its hero. Because in a room where every interruption is a power play, not reacting is the ultimate flex. She knew something Bondi didn't. When you know the truth, you don't need to shout. She delivered the rest of her statement methodically, each fact cleaner than the last, each pause more commanding than a shout. By the time she finished, the room was quiet again. Not out of tension, but out of respect. The silence didn't feel like the calm before another storm. It felt like the sound of someone winning. And beyond the walls of that hearing room, America was already talking. TikTok edits were being layered with music. You don't have to yell to be heard. One caption read. A Twitter thread called it a masterclass in composure. One viral meme showed Bondi's scream next to Crockett's blank stare, with the caption, "One of these women lost her cool. The other gained a movement." And in that moment, Crockett didn't just counter an attack. She changed the temperature of the entire room. She reminded people, especially women, especially black women, that strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just refuses to be moved. It was never just about the words. It was about the way she said them, with grace, with grit, with the unwavering knowledge that history was watching and she was ready for her close-up. Pam Bondi had tried to silence her, but Jasmine Crockett had used that silence to speak louder than any shout ever could. And that moment, the precision, the composure, the poise wasn't just a mic drop, it was a seismic shift. But what happened outside the room made this moment unforgettable. It took less than 90 seconds. One moment of calm, cutting power, and the internet ignited. Before the hearing even adjourned, phones buzzed with notifications. On Twitter, a single clip, just 13 seconds long, showed Jasmine Crockett's poised reply to Pam Bondi's meltdown. No yelling, no dramatics, just, "Ma'am, I wasn't finished." Within 12 minutes, Jasmine Crockett was trending nationally. Not as a politician, as a moment, as a mood, as a message. TikToks flooded the algorithm. Some set her reply to orchestral swells. Others looped it over trap beats. Edits popped with captions like, "She ate and left no crumbs. This is what unbothered looks like." The entire room felt that. And the comments? They read like applause. I watched this 17 times. The pause before she spoke? Iconic. "I've never felt so seen." Protect this woman at all costs. It wasn't just the usual political corners celebrating her. The clip spilled into unexpected feeds. Beauty bloggers shared it. Poets quoted her. Gen Z dubbed her the calmest savage alive. And celebrities chimed in. An A-list actress tweeted, "This is what Grace Under Fire looks like." A Grammy-winning singer reposted the video with 3 words, "My new ringtone." Even a Republican strategist admitted on live television, "I don't agree with her politics, but that was surgical." Meanwhile, Pam Bondi said nothing. No tweets, no post-hearing interviews, no attempt to reclaim the narrative, because the narrative had already moved on without her. Bondi had come in swinging. She left as a meme. One frame captured her mid-outburst, mouth open, face twisted, while Crockett remained motionless beside her. That image traveled faster than any headline. Commentators didn't need to explain it. The contrast spoke for itself. The silencer had been silenced. And Crockett? She didn't gloat. No victory lap, no, quote, tweets. She returned to her office and posted a single photo, her sitting at the hearing table. Mid-sentence, captioned simply, "Still not finished." Tens of thousands of likes poured in. Comments flooded with fire emojis, raised fists, and one repeated phrase, "This is why representation matters." Because it wasn't just about politics. It was about posture. How a black woman stood her ground without raising her voice. How she dismantled disrespect without ever stooping to it. How she didn't change her tone and made the world listen anyway. In the days that followed, her press requests tripled. Supporters flooded her inbox. Donations surged. News anchors called her the voice of a generation. And political analysts noted how quickly she'd gone from rising star to household name. But more than any headline or poll, it was the reaction that made it clear. She had struck something deeper. A nerve, a hope, a hunger to see someone push back against a machine that too often tries to drown out the very voices that deserve to be heard. Bondi had used volume. Crockett had used value. And the country had chosen its favorite. But beyond the views and shares, there was a deeper lesson. In the days after the clip went viral, Jasmine Crockett wasn't just a trending topic, she became a mirror. Mirror for every person who'd been talked over in a meeting. Dismissed in a classroom. Interrupted, mid-sentence, and expected to smile through it. She didn't. Raise her voice. She didn't match the chaos. She held the line. And that stillness, that elegant refusal to be diminished, redefined what power could look like. For too long, leadership in America has been framed by who can shout the loudest, who can command the spotlight, who can interrupt and still be applauded for it. But in a single moment, Crockett flipped the script. She reminded us, you don't have to yell to be heard, because power isn't volume, it's presence. It's standing in the middle of noise and choosing not to play the same game because, the truth carries farther. When it's delivered with clarity, Crockett didn't just reclaim the mic. She reshaped it. She showed that dignity is disruptive, that calm is defiant, that grace is a form of resistance. Her composure wasn't passive, it was strategic. It wasn't weakness, it was will. And in that moment, she didn't just represent herself. She represented millions. Viewers across the country saw themselves in her silence, in her posture, in her power, and maybe, Just maybe they asked themselves, what would I have done? Would I have had the courage to speak? Could I have stayed calm in the face of contempt? Crockett's answer was clear. Yes, you can. Because you don't need permission to speak. You don't need a louder voice, you need a stronger truth. That hearing room was never meant for someone like her to dominate. But she didn't need to dominate. She needed to exist fully in it, and that was more than enough. Because real leadership doesn't demand silence from others. It creates space for more voices to rise. And somewhere, maybe in Houston or Harlem, Detroit or Dallas, a young girl watched Jasmine Crockett that day, watched her remain composed, watched her speak anyway, watched her become undeniable. And in that quiet, powerful moment, she realized she could run for Congress too. Stop talking. That moment, the one that made headlines, split the internet, and shook a room full of power, isn't just a viral clip anymore. Now, you know what it meant. It was more than a shout, more than a clash. It was a test of poise, of principle, of presence. And Jasmine Crockett passed with power. She didn't meet chaos with chaos. She met it with control. She showed that the calmest person in the room can be the most dangerous because they're the one you can't shake. Her words didn't go viral because they were loud. They went viral because they were true. So if you've ever been interrupted, ever been dismissed, ever been told to stop talking just as you found your voice, this moment was for you. If you believe calm is stronger than chaos, subscribe. If you've ever wanted someone to say what you couldn't share this, if you've ever wished someone like Crockett had your back, drop a comment below, 'cause the world doesn't change when we yell louder. It changes when we speak with purpose and refuse to be silenced. Be the voice, not the noise. We're just getting started.